Hello, I'm Joan Landis. Really happy to be with you. Today we're going to move on to the next concept that I teach my clients after the your world of emotions. Now I always start with your world of emotions first because that lays the foundation for this next concept. This next concept is called the cognitive, emotional, behavioral chain. Wow, what does that mean? Well, cognitive is anything to do with your mind. Emotional is anything to do with your feelings. And behavior is how your behavior is made. And so we're going to talk right now about how this all works, and then also how our core issues and our world of emotions fits and feeds right in to our cognitive, emotional, behavioral chains. Now another word for that, another way I say it is a CEB chain. Okay, so if I say CEB chain, that's what I mean, all right? So we're going to go ahead and look at that right now and understand how this works. In a CEB chain, CEB, it represents your cognitive, emotional, behavioral chain. And the first thing that happens is you have an activating event occur, okay? We can't actually control all of these activating events that happen in our lives. I do have some clients that think they can, and we call this OCD, which doesn't mean that you can't fix this, but you're just a little bit behind the curve if you actually believe that you can, control all of these. So the first thing is the activating event happens. Now we're going to have an example of this, so this is just the theoretical part first. So first thing, activating event. After the activating event, you have some things happen in your mind, and these are called cognitions. The very first thing that happens is you have a perception of something. Now that perception is a really simple little pattern in your brain, and it basically says, is this good or bad? Do I need to run, or can I continue picking daisies? So the perception is a very simple concept. Is this good or bad? After we establish our perception, then we have a thought. The thought is, the sentence that goes through your mind, an opinion or whatever, and we'll talk about that a little more later. But these thoughts are really important to notice. And after we have the thought, then we give meaning to that thought. And that's what we call the interpretation. The interpretation is the meaning that we give, the big meaning about the big picture, about the world, our lives, and what the thoughts mean, what the activating event means, okay? So that's the second link in this is the CEB chain. There's the cognitions. Now those cognitions tend to drive what we call our emotions. And this should sound familiar because when we did our work with your inner world being like your physical world, we talked about your primary emotions and secondary emotions, right? So this should be a familiar concept to you. So cognitions tend to drive your emotions, all right? And then your emotions are what drives your behaviors, okay? So this is what we call our CEB chain. All right, here's our chain. Now, let's do an example of how this all works out. So you have an activating event, and the activating event is you get an F on a test. There is your piece of paper on your desk that's saying you got an F, all right? Now the next thing that happens is some cognitions that happen in your mind. The first one is a perception. The perception is this good or bad? This is bad, right? And then you have a thought, and your thought may say, I'm going to flunk this class. Okay, that might be your thought. And then if you have that thought, the interpretation you might have, what this means to your life or the big picture is, I'm never going to get to college and I'm going to be homeless, right? So if you're telling yourself those kinds of thoughts and interpretations, the likely emotions that's going to generate, primary emotions, could be fear, right? I'm scared of the future. I'm scared of fear of failure, and shame. Everybody else in my family went to Harvard and I can't get out of Delta High. So that's the primary emotions that can be generated from all of these cognitions. And then secondary emotions, which kind of cover our primary emotions, are maybe in this case you get anxiety and depressed. Now other people might get other emotions, but maybe for you this is where you go. And then what's the behavior that you're going to be acting out because you have those emotions? Well, in this case, maybe you bite your nails or you watch Netflix for 3 days straight. Maybe you get in a conflict with your parents. Maybe you start arguing about grades with your parents. It could be a lot of different behaviors, but this person decides to bite their nails and do kind of the more passive and avoidant thing like watch Netflix. Okay, so that is your CEB chain. Now here's the interesting thing. We can't control all of these. And these, our behaviors, tend to be driven by these, our emotions. And our emotions tend to be driven by our cognitions, right? So if we want to change this chain, how it ends up, which link in the chain should we focus on really shifting? Where would be the link that we could make the most difference? Okay, that's right. It's the cognitions. This is where we can make the most difference in how this whole chain turns out. Because if we can shift our thoughts, then we will shift our feelings and shift our behaviors. And the interesting thing about this is when you get really good at changing your thoughts to something healthier, instead of this thing, I'm going to flunk this class and I'm going to be a total failure. Instead of going there, when you learn to have healthier cognitions, you actually can do it almost instantly. I mean, that's great. And it's moral, it's legal, it costs no money, and it's non-fattening, right? So what is not to like about shifting your cognitions? And in my practice, we do a lot of work around this. Not all of it, but a lot of work around it. And so this is a really, really important concept to understand, is how important cognitions are to the entire chain of events in your daily events. Remember when we used the model of the physical world being like your inner world, okay? So we have the stressors, the behaviors, the stressors, which seem to pressure us into certain behaviors, but what really drives our behaviors are secondary emotions, our primary emotions, which are driven by our core issues. Remember that discussion? Okay. So this is the big core issues of our lives and how this plays out. The CEB chain is more what happens in our everyday occurrences. But here's the cool thing. Here's how this lines up with this, okay? So think about it. The activating event really represents our environment, right? Okay. And the behavior represents our behaviors, right? There that is. Okay, what do we have left? We've got our emotions. Here's that. There's our emotions. What do we have left? What are we missing? That's right, our core issues. Our core issues are really important to understand because our core issues tend to drive our perceptions, thoughts, and our interpretations. Okay? So in the example that we had with the test, if somebody has a core issue of lovability, their thought might be, oh, I knew my teacher didn't like me. Okay? If they have a core issue of worth, it will be that failure piece that we originally talked about. Oh, I'm going to flunk this class. I knew I was stupid. And then maybe if we have abandonment issues, the thought might be something like, see, nobody ever helps me. Nobody ever helps me when I need help. So the core issues really drive a lot of our cognitions. And so again, a very important reason to understand our core issues is because it helps us understand why we seem to go with certain patterns of thoughts and interpretations, which then generate a lot of negative emotion, which generate a lot of negative behavior. Okay? So that's really important stuff to know. So now that we've kind of lined this up for you, I want you to see what goes on in another situation, because if you have the same thing happen to 3 different people, you will get 3 different responses because you will have 3 different types of cognitions, because you have 3 different types of core issues, because you have 3 different histories, right? 3 different layers of unfinished business. So I'm going to show you how this happens. Okay, here's an activating event that's going to happen to 3 different people. Here it is. Somebody cut you off in traffic. There it is. Boom. All right. The first person has a perception of this is bad, right? And here's a thought that they have. The thought is, selfish jerk, he could have killed us all. And then here's the interpretation this person has. Guys like that ought to be punished, right? That's what it means to the big picture, to the world. This world is an unjust, unsafe place, and people like that ought to be punished, right? So we can hear some core issues in here, can't we? Safety and trust in the world, things like that, okay? So these types of thoughts and interpretations generate what kind of primary emotions? Ooh, fear, right? I'm scared for my life. I'm scared for my safety. Shame that someone got away with just treating me like that. And hurt that they would be so rude to me, you know. That's very hurtful. And then the secondary emotions are, you go to anger or hatred or rage or all three, right? Road rage, okay. And then what's the likely behavior? Those kind of emotions drive generally this kind of behavior. Cursing, swearing, or maybe even getting into a conflict, okay? All right. Now somebody else has the exact same thing happen. Here's their activating event. Here's their perception. This is bad. And here's their thought. Maybe he has an emergency. And here's their interpretation. Everyone has emergencies sometimes, right? That's what it means to the big picture. So everyone has some hard times, right? Now, when you tell yourself things like that, here's the primary emotions it generates. Compassion for whatever problem it was, and empathy. Oh, I remember that time when, you know, my brother cut his arm and he was bleeding all over the car. You get empathy. And your secondary emotions are, you forgive them, you cut them some slack, and you have some patience for what was going on. And here's the likely behavior that those emotions drive. You wonder what the emergency was, and you just keep driving, okay? All right. Now the third person has the same thing happen to them. Their perception is, sure, this is bad. Now if you hang around with me long enough, you can get to the point where you actually say this is good. But for now, we'll go with the this is bad. Here's some thoughts. Not worth losing my cool. Nobody was hurt. Okay, you have that thought. Here's what it means. This is the interpretation. I'm in control of my life. I don't give my power to total strangers to ruin my day, right? I'm the one that's in control. And here's the primary emotion that generates. I'm calm, I'm peaceful. Here's the secondary emotions. Well, I'm really grateful that I do not have to let my buttons get pushed by some person who's struggling. And I'm in control. Those are my emotions. And here's my behavior. I'm not distracted. I'm focused on my goals, right? Okay. Now, the hardest way to be a really calm, peaceful, joyful person is to have this happen. And you go with this stuff, and you start feeling this stuff, and then you say, but my therapist said if I get angry, that's actually going to give me ulcers and migraines. So I guess I better try to do this. And then you try to keep it all in and keep the lid on your boiling pot. But then you go home and you kick your dog. Oh, not good. All right. So the easiest way to be this kind of person or this kind of person is to choose these kinds of thoughts. Okay? When you choose these kinds of thoughts, did you have to struggle to feel this way? Gratitude, control, compassion. Did you have to struggle? Did you have to count to 10? Did you have to write in your journal? No, you didn't. It just lines up like ducks in a row. Okay? And so this is such an important piece to really watch and learn to shift from stuff like this to stuff like this, so that you don't end up with stuff like this, but instead end up with stuff like this.
Okay, so I hope that was really helpful to you to understand how the chain of events works. And what I'd love for you to do this week is to do the worksheet, the action item, where you connect the chain for yourself. So before you connected the dots as far as connecting your layers into your core issues. Now what we'd like you to do is learn what happens in day-to-day life, and so much of it is focused on that cognitive piece, right? And so we want you to, anytime you're feeling or doing something kind of negative, again, kind of like the other assignment, we want you to document the activating event, and then the cognitions, that would be the perception and the thoughts and the interpretation, and then the primary and secondary emotions, and your presenting behavior. So if you can do that this week a couple of times, that will be really, really important exercise, because you'll start understanding that you don't just suddenly become angry. You actually have a chain of events, and knowing that there is a space there between the activating event and the behavior, in that space we can do some incredible stuff. But first of all, we need to know what's happening in that space. So do that for yourself, and post on the forums any insights that you have, any discoveries that you have.